So my name is Nancy Sporborg.
And I'm Pat Piper.
Okay, so the other thing that's a little bit different about this presentation is that we're going to introduce you to a ritual. This is a tradition or a ritual that Pat and I have done for years and years and years. Alone. When we're nervous or we're upset or we're having a hard time getting to the summit of that mountain, whatever it is, we scream as loud as we can. And we do it together. So it helps us, it helps get our nerves calm and everything. We need your help. So I'd like to ask you to stand up. And yeah, we're going to turn the sound down. Okay, so you guys, I want you to give it your all. On the count of 3, we're going to scream as loud as you possibly can to get all that energy out. You ready? 1, 2, 3. That was great. That was great. Thank you very much. That was great.
Okay.
You're on. Doesn't it feel good?
Yeah. Okay. How many of you have seen us before? How many of you have not seen us?
Oh, wow.
Wow. Okay. Well, welcome the folks who have not seen us, and welcome again to the folks who have seen us, some people many times. There's actually somebody who came up to me and said, I've seen you 6 times, and now I brought my family. Yeah, it's great. Okay. How many of you are hikers? Yeah. Okay. I mean, everybody gets out there and moves their feet. So how many of you have been up in the White Mountains? How many of you have climbed a 4,000-footer in the White Mountains?
Oh, look at that. Lots of people.
How many of you have climbed a 48?
Woohoo! Look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think 1, 2, 3. Keep your hands up for a sec. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 people. 14. Awesome. I'm 67.
Oh, have any of you climbed the 67? 1, 2. Hey, I didn't know you were here, Bernie. Bernie. Okay, never mind.
And anybody climb the 100 highest? 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice job.
What?
Okay.
Oh, right. Okay. We haven't done this in a while. I hope our presentation brings you back to familiar trails and beautiful views, and you relate to some of your own experience by listening to our story.
We all have our own mountains to climb. So they might be 4,000 footers in the White Mountains, but it might be raising children. It might be taking care of aging parents. It might be dealing with a difficult project at work. It might be starting an exercise program. It might be finding new meaning in your life. So we all have our own mountains to climb. This presentation is not a presentation of, look at us, look what we did. It's a presentation of, look inside you. You can do this too.
Well, I've been down every trail, and I never took the guardrail. I climbed every mountain. I walked past every cave, and I should have missed the old man. I climbed every mountain. Isolation, Womback, Whiteface, Galehead, Jackson, Tom, Boncliffe, Cannon, Owlhead, South End, Cock, and Pierce. Sealand, Westbound, Middle Carter, Garfield, Kerrigan, Mount Tecumseh, Washington, South Carter, and Jefferson. Eisenhower, Moosalagi, Carter, Dome, Southwind, Monroe, Madison, Lafayette, Lincoln, Passaconaway, Noel Kinsman. Middle Tri-Pyramid, East Osceola, North Tri-Pyramid, Wildcat, Deep, Flume, and Willie too. Osceola, Adams, Field, and Hancock, Wildcat, South Kinsman, Hale, and Cabot, Northwind, Mariah, and Liberty. I climbed all 48, 4,000 footers in the state. I climbed every mountain. This hiking dries out my throat, so I'll meet you later at home. I climbed every mountain. After a good long hike, there's nothing better than some iron Mike. I climbed every mountain. Well, I've been down every trail, and I never took the cog rail. I climbed every mountain. I walked past every cave, and I should have missed the old man. I climbed every mountain. Isolation, Womback, Whiteface, Galehead, Jackson, Tom, Boncliffe, Cannon, Owlhead, South End, Cock, and Pierce. Sealand, Westbound, Middle Carter, Garfield, Kerrigan, Mount Tecumseh, Washington, South Carter, and Jefferson. Eisenhower, Moosalagi, Carter, Dome, Southwind, Monroe, Madison, Lafayette, Lincoln, Passaconaway, and Noel Kinsman. Middle Tri-Pyramid, East Osceola, North Tri-Pyramid, Wildcat, Deep, Flume, and Willie too. Osceola, Adams, Field, and Hancock, Wildcat, South Kinsman, Hale, and Cabot, Northwind, Mariah, and Liberty. I climbed all 48, 4,000 footers in the state. I climbed every mountain. This hiking dries out my throat, so I'll meet you later at home. I climbed every mountain. After a good long hike, nothing's better than some iron Mike. I climbed every mountain. When I'm done, my feet are real sore, but I'll be back next week and for more. I climbed every mountain.
Together, Pat and I have reached the summits of over 250 mountains, climbing since 2006 through all 4 seasons. We have walked more than 1,500 miles, and we have gained more than 475,000 feet in elevation, which is equivalent to climbing Everest from base camp 43 times. How do we do it? One step at a time. Pat and I actually met by chance. We didn't know each other. We happened to be at the same meeting, and I looked at her, and she looked like a person who might like to go outside. So very unlike me. I knew her name, and I knew where she worked. So I looked up her email address on the Keene State College website, and I sent her an email asking her if she wanted to go for some walks. And she wrote back and said, sure. So we started walking back and forth between our workplaces. We worked 2 miles apart on flat ground. We did that for a while, and then we decided to add a hill. So we started climbing up this hill where we live. And one day, when we were climbing up the hill, we started talking about Katahdin, which is this beautiful mountain in Maine. And I said to Pat, well, let's do it. And she said,
we were climbing Matthews Road. Katahdin is over 5,000 feet. Maybe we ought to do a little training first, work our way up. So then we said, you know, look, we'll try, we'll climb some of the 4,000 footers. Then I told her about the 67 4,000 footers in New England. That's the 67 highest mountains in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And if you climb them all on the honor system, they give you a patch.
A patch. That is all I needed to hear. I said, well, let's do it. Now, I don't know what I was thinking when I said let's do it, because we were two 50-plus-year-old non-hikers. But what I learned about Pat and what she learned about me is that once we commit to something, there's pretty much no stopping us. And 2.5 years later, we finished climbing the 67 4,000 footers in New England, and we got our patch. So this is the patch that you get for climbing the 48 mountains in New Hampshire that are over 4,000 feet. And this is the patch that you get for climbing the 67 mountains in New England that are over 4,000 feet. And then a few summers ago, Pat and I finished climbing what they call the 100 highest mountains in New England, and we got our patch. What became really clear to us, though, hike after hike after hike, is that it's not about the hike. Hiking has actually been a doorway for us that has led us on an internal journey. We were actually ready for the views that we saw looking out. We were really surprised by what we found looking in. It's about living in the moment and believing in yourself. Pat and I decided to climb the Tri-Pyramids. It's 3 mountains in the White Mountains. We were going to climb 2 of them, because 2 of them count for the 4,000 footer list. So we drove to the trailhead. Doesn't look like much. And there was a guy that had arrived about 10 minutes before us. He got on all his gear, and he started off before us. So we have a picture of Pat at the trailhead. Now, she's looking all happy and chipper, and that's because she has no idea what's in store for her today. And we have a picture of me. So we started off on the Pine Bend Brook Trail, and you know, as you can see, it was winter, but the trail was all broken out. It was beautiful. It followed the Pine Bend Brook. It was gorgeous. And we hiked for probably the first 2.5 miles. And all of a sudden, we saw the guy who'd started off ahead of us coming back towards us. And he was shaking his head, and he was muttering to himself, which is never a good sign, right? We got up to him, and we said, "What's up?" And he said, "You can't go any further. The trail just ends. It's not packed out, and there's more snow than you've ever seen in your life." And, you know, we looked at him, and we said, "Well, we'll help you break the trail." And he looked at Pat, and he looked at me, and he shook his head, and he continued back towards his car. We did not let that stop us. We continued on, and we got to the place where he stopped. And it was really obvious where he stopped because the trail just ended. And there was more snow than I'd ever seen in my life. We have a picture showing how much snow there was in one place. So Pat was ahead of me on the trail, and we had our snowshoes on. And, you know, the trail just went straight up. We were in the bottom of a ravine, went straight up from where we were. And she'd take one step up this really steep incline, and she'd just slide back down. She'd take another step up, and she'd just slide back down. And I was standing to the side, I'm watching her, and I said, "This is crazy." And she said, "This is crazy." But I'm not ready to give up. I'm not ready to give up, she says. So I had to reassess, because clearly I was. Pat said, "I just want to get to the top of the ravine." I could see blue sky up there. So I said, okay. So we took off our snowshoes and we put on crampons because we weren't going to get anywhere in snowshoes. And we have a very short clip showing me going up the side of the ravine.
So I'm walking up the mountain and oh, well, pole's really handy, isn't it? Huh? What do we, whoop. Wait, let's try again. Okay, ready?
Take two.
Whoa! Here's my pole.
That's how deep the snow is.
And up we go.
We did get to the top of the ravine, and it was beautiful up there. But remember, the trail's not packed out. So the only way that we know where the trail is, we're following the blazes on the trees. And when we got to the top of the ravine, we couldn't find any blaze. Pat went off in one direction, I went off in another. We're screaming at each other over this hill. Finally, Pat found the trail, and we continued on. We got lost 2 or 3 more times trying to figure out where this trail was that would take us to the top of that mountain. But we did get to the top of North Tri-Pyramid. But what you can't see in this picture is that it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So 2 o'clock in the afternoon is late to get to the top of your first summit when you're climbing 2 mountains and it's winter. And I looked at Pat and I said, ugh, I don't know if I want to go down that really steep section in the dark. And she said,
I mean, it was January, it's going to be dark in a couple of hours. We either go down now and come all the way back, or we put on our headlamps and we go for it. We got each other, we can do it.
when she said the part about we'd have to go down and then come back another day, okay, no. Absolutely not. I am never coming back to this mountain again. So I just put my head down and I headed off on the trail that connected the ridge, and it was gorgeous up there. And we did get to the top of Middle Tri-Pyramid probably an hour later. Then we went back to North Tri-Pyramid and then down the mountain. We did come down in the dark, but we'd made this beautiful trail, right? It was really easy going out. We could see where we were going. So this hike was huge for me because it reminded me that if I can just stay in the moment, right, not forward think, not worry about how dark it's going to be, how cold it's going to be, how hard it's going to be, not worry about any of those things, but just stay in the moment, I can accomplish absolutely anything.
It's about witnessing the majesty of nature. Nancy and I went on a really long hike once. This next slide is a very rare sighting of Nancy Sporborg at 5 in the morning with her eyes open. Check it out, folks. She's not a morning person. However, I am a morning person. So I was ready for this one. A couple of hours later, the sun was starting to come up. The mist was rising from the swamp behind us, and everything was covered in dew. It was a perfect August morning. And we started to see a lot of these. I said, oh, yeah, we're going to finally see a moose. So we got really quiet. We were going down the trail. Did you see anything? Checking to see. Listen. Did you folks hear it? And after about an hour, we stopped because we felt like idiots. So we started talking again, and we were just walking along, came around a corner, and this guy stood up. Now, this guy, this is not a telephoto lens. So I'm coming around the corner, and there he is.
And I'm behind Pat on the trail. What do you think he's going to do, Pat?
I don't know.
And then we just stared at him while he stared at us. And then, very slowly, we took out our cameras and we started to take pictures.
And he was a young bull moose. You can still see the velvet on his antlers. And he was very unimpressed with us. Eventually, he moved away and gave us this picture. What an incredible shot. I mean, this was a really long hike. So every half hour, I turned to Nancy. We saw a moose. Like, we saw a real moose. Not a moose on the side of the road, but a moose in Mooseville. But where they live. We've had other encounters with wildlife. Have any of you heard or seen gray jays? Yeah. Special bird. They look very much like blue jays, but they're gray. They're also called Canada jays or camp robbers. They live in pairs high in the boreal forest of North America. Now, Nancy and I were coming down Mount Jackson, and a pair of them found us. And they made it very clear that they were not going to let us pass unless and until we had shared some of our trail mix with them. So I have a movie of Nancy doing just that.
Okay, here we go. Hi. How you doing? Those naps feel better.
That was so cool. I've never seen anything like it. You know, they love the peanuts, they love the raisins, and they left us all the M&Ms.
I like these birds.
Most of the time we experience nature in our world, wildlife like this, you know, a deer crossing the road. But when you're up in the mountains, in their world, wow, it's an awesome experience.
It's about opening to the world around you and welcoming what shows up. Very early on in our hiking together, I had a rule. And the rule was that we would only hike on sunny days. So the weather report was beautiful, and we decided to climb the Hancocks, 2 mountains in the White Mountains. We drove up to the trailhead, and the mountain was enshrouded in clouds, and it was spitting rain. And I was so mad. But we just drove 3.5 hours. We're not going to turn around. So we decided to go ahead and hike. So up we go. And within the first, half hour or so, we're soaked, right? We're soaked from the outside in because it's raining. We're soaked from the inside out because we're sweating. We're climbing up this 4,000-footer, and we're working hard, and we're sweating. And, we wear all that tech wick material, but it doesn't wick away all that sweat, right? It was miserable. We did get to the top. So I'm always really embarrassed when we show this picture because I look ridiculous with my hood all tight to my head. But I was trying to have peripheral vision. Anyway, Pat knows how to use her hood, and she looks much better. Anyway, it was absolutely miserable. And then something happened. I started to point out the views to Pat.
Wait till you see this view.
And then I started to decorate my hair with everything I found on the trail. And at one point, I noticed that there were slugs on the trees, and I started pointing out the slugs to Pat, and I got so excited about the slugs, I said, woohoo! And my echo came back to me. I said, Pat, that was an echo. You do it. So she woohooed, and her woohoo came back to her. So we stood there for 15 minutes, woohooing. And all of a sudden, I realized we were having a blast. We were having more fun on this hike than we'd had on any sunny day hike. And that was a big learning for me. I learned that I can love living life no matter what the weather, no matter what the circumstances. And that was a really good lesson to learn because things got a whole lot worse. And this is one of those stories of a whole lot worse. It's about daring to venture outside of your comfort zone. So Pat and I decided to climb Madison, which is in the presidential range of the White Mountains. So we drove up to the trailhead, and we're sitting in the car, and we're looking at the map of the White Mountains. And Pat said to me,
this was our first presidential. I was beyond excited. I could hardly stand myself. And I planned an out and back route on Valley Way. But then I'm looking at the map, and there's Mount Adams, an inch away. And we could do a loop hike and come back to the same parking lot. What do you think?
Yeah,
Okay.
why not? So that's the plan, Adams and Madison. So we have a picture of me at the trailhead, and what you can't see in this picture is that the wind is howling at the trailhead. And we have a picture of Pat. And see the yellow lab in the corner there? That's Deja. She's my daughter's dog, and she is our trail dog. So you'll see her in a lot of the pictures. So Pat and I head up the mountain, and we hike for probably the first 2.5 miles, and we reach the famous sign. Stop. The area ahead has the worst weather in America. Many have died from exposure, even in the summer. Turn back now if the weather is bad. Well, when we were reading the sign, the wind was howling like crazy, but we were still below tree line and we were still within our comfort zones. So we decided to keep going. So we get to tree line, and this is what it looked like. The mountain was in a cloud. There wasn't a lot of snow that year. It was cold, but the real story was the wind. The wind was ferocious. I mean, it was unbelievable. I have never experienced wind like that. It sounded to me like there was a freight train going right by my head, and the wind was picking up my backpack straps and throwing them in my face. I mean, it was wild. And for the first 10 seconds, it was exhilarating. After that, things went downhill pretty quick, but we decided to keep going. So this is me, and I'm thinking that right up there, I'm thinking that's Mount Adams, that we're almost there. Well, we get up there, and that's not Mount Adams. I have no idea where Mount Adams is, and by this time, I've developed a little bit of an attitude, right, because I'm scared to death, and it was Pat's idea to do Adams. So I keep screaming at her. I keep screaming, "Where's Adams?" Well, to her, with all that wind, to her it looks like she can't hear a word I'm saying. So we were scared to death. So at one point, and we do hike safely. We do hike with a map. We have all this safety stuff. My map is the size of an opened newspaper. So think about opening a newspaper in hurricane force winds, right? And here's the kicker. I'm old. I need glasses. The thought of going through my pack and finding my map and my glasses put me over the edge. And I did what I always do when I'm outside of my comfort zone. I started to cry. So this is me crying. And I'm wearing one of those balaclavas that covers your nose and your mouth. Okay, don't cry with one of those on. So at this point, I'm scared to death. Pat's just as nervous. So we decide to head down the mountain. All I want to do is get off that mountain. I didn't care where Adams was. So we turned around. Right as we turned around, the wind whipped the clouds off the summits, and this is what we saw. So this is probably one of the most beautiful views of Mount Madison anyone could ever hope to see. We did not appreciate it in the moment. We took pictures as fast as we could, and we headed down that mountain. We didn't get any peak that day. But what the experience did is it stretched our comfort zone, right? So that the next time we were in high wind, it was a little bit easier. And then the next time we were in high wind, it was a little bit easier still, right? Same thing in life. First time you're in a really tough situation, you cry. Second time, it's a little bit easier, you might not cry. Third time, it gets better and better, right? So fast forward a year and a half, and Pat and I are climbing Hamlin, which is a mountain in Maine, and the winds were incredible. It's Pat trying to stand up in the wind. And by this time, Pat had bought a wind gauge. So she was holding up the wind gauge, and I was standing behind her looking at the numbers on the wind gauge. It said 45. I was like, 45? Give me 46, give me 47, come on, let's get up to 50. It did get up to 50 miles per hour. But all of a sudden I realized, hey, you're cheering the wind on. a year and a half ago, I was standing in that wind in my balaclava crying. So I had come a long way. By being willing to put myself outside of my comfort zone, I had gotten to the place where I actually enjoyed being in ferocious wind. Just one note about safety, and I know a lot of you know this, but I'm just going to say it. If you're hiking and you're not sure of the difference between being outside of your comfort zone and being unsafe, then you always turn around. Pat and I have turned around many times. But if you're safe and you're stretching your comfort zone, go for it. Because stretching your comfort zone helps you become more of who you're meant to be.
It's about healing and becoming whole. This journey that Nancy and I are on has been a healing one for both of us. For some 30-odd years of my adult life, I was a heavy drinker. I drank every day. I drank a lot every day. Then I met Nancy and I started hiking. The first 4,000 footer that I climbed, I did with a hangover. That was not nice. I realized that I liked this person who was climbing these mountains and had this goal and was getting fit. And I realized at that point I had to stop drinking. And one day, very early in our hiking together, we were on the Walpat Trail, almost exactly this spot. And I was talking to Nancy about quitting. And how do you do that? How do you just stop a habit of 30 years? And she said to me,
why don't you just stop?
30 years. Why don't you just stop? So I guess I was ready to hear that because I went home that day and I threw it all out and I haven't had a drink since June 10th, 2006.
And I have struggled with weight and fitness for a good portion of my life. And I finally got to the place where I was willing to try to do something about it. So I went on a diet, and I lost some weight. And then I drove myself to a gym, and I sat in the car and cried, trying to find whatever it is we have inside ourselves that helps us overcome shame. But I got myself out of the car and into the gym, and I stayed for the class. I stayed as far away from the people in the mirrors as I could, but I stayed for the class. And I got myself to the next class and the next class. And over a period of a few years, lost 80 pounds. You know, I still struggle with weight. I think weight will be a lifelong struggle. But I think what Pat and I have learned is that it's not about losing weight. It's not about stopping drinking. It's about living your life. By stopping drinking and losing weight, we have enabled ourselves to really live our lives, to find our passion and live our lives. And that's what we think it's about. It's about discovering your inner strength and courage, which we all have. You know, this isn't a presentation about these two ladies who just climbed up these mountains and came down easy peasy. That's not it. These mountains were hard for me. Every single 4,000 footer was hard for me. I am on the continual search for an easy 4,000 footer. I would start off every hike day, I'd be getting my stuff ready, and I'd say to myself, please God, may I make it up this mountain. And I'd say that to myself as I was packing my gear. And then I'd go outside, and I'd stand in the driveway and wait for Pat to drive in, and I'd open the car door, and I'd look at her, and I'd say, oh, please may I be able to get to the top of this mountain. And then I'd talk about it most of the drive up for 3 hours. So she heard it a lot. And then we'd get to the trailhead, and I'd say that like a mantra the whole way up the mountain until I got to the top. And I did that for 63 mountains. And then we climbed Saddleback and Horn, 2 mountains in Maine. And when I got up that morning, the words weren't there, so I didn't say them. We drove to the trailhead, and the words weren't there, so I just didn't say them. And we started up the mountain, and I felt so strong and so powerful and so sure that I was going to get to the top of that mountain. I was filled with the most incredible sense of well-being. It just filled me. And we easily got to the top of Horn and Saddleback. And we hiked down, and I went home, and I was talking to my husband, trying to figure out what made this hike different. And I finally realized that I had never actually owned the fact that I had climbed those 63 mountains. I had pretended that I didn't do them. It's like I had low self-esteem. I didn't really believe I could do it, and I never really let it in that I did it. So each time I climbed a mountain, it was a new experience. When I finally let it in that I had climbed those 63 mountains, well, of course I was going to get to the top of the next one. Why wouldn't I? This hike was huge for me because it felt like the very first time I could call myself a hiker.
It's about take your breath away beauty and never-ending views. No point in standing up here talking about it. We're going to share a short film that we've taken with pictures that we've taken along the trail. It's most definitely about experiencing the exhilaration of absolute exhaustion. Nancy and I decided that we wanted to challenge ourselves. So we decided to do what's called long-distance hiking. And we chose to do a Bonds Traverse. It's 4 mountains, 1 day, 10 miles out, 10 miles back. So we picked a perfect August day. And this is the view that we got when we got up to the Zealand hut. It was perfect. We got up to the ridge. We were having a good time. We were feeling good, feeling strong. We got to our first summit, Mount Zealand, around 9:30. About 10:30, we got to our second summit, West Bond. The views from here were incredible. We got to our third mountain in the afternoon, Mount Bond. Now look at them. They're still smiling. They're still friends. We had to go down through that scrub and then up the ridge behind us to a mountain called Bondcliff. Now, look at my face on Boncliff. I'm not smiling anymore. I was really, really tired. My knees were killing me. My feet were screaming. I could not believe really what we had done to ourselves. All the way out, we have to walk all the way back on the same trail. I'm checking my phone to see if I have any bars. I mean, maybe somebody could land here. I checked the map to see if there was a shorter trail down from Boncliff. And we'd hitchhike back to the car. It was even longer. So there was nothing to do but to turn around and walk all the way back. It took us 15 and a half hours to do this hike. And here we are, in the parking lot, the victors. We can do long-distance hiking. But do we really want to? Is a death march the way we want to spend our time in these mountains? That was an easy one. No. So, here we were in the parking lot. It was 8:30 at night, and we still had a 3-hour drive back to King. We didn't plan this very well. So, we also had forgotten a change of clothes. So we'd been in these clothes for 15 and a half hours. We got in the car, and Nancy was taking off her boots.
Yeah, you know, I was sitting in the car and I leaned over to take my boots off, so my nose went in my shirt, and I got a whiff of myself. I smelled horrible, and Pat did not smell much better.
So, 2 stinky women in the car. Windows were down because it was a warm night. And eventually we just sort of canceled each other out. Stopped smelling it. So we're driving home, talking about this incredible experience. Look at what we just did. And we never have to do it again. So we're pulling off of I-89 onto 2029, come around a corner, and there were 3 state trooper cars. Blue lights blazing. It was 11:30 at night, and they were pulling everybody over. So I pulled over. And the trooper who was assigned to my car came up to my window and said, "Could I see your license and registration, ma'am?" Remember, I had forgotten how bad we smelled, you know, canceling out. I was mortified. I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, officer. My stuff's in the back. Do you want me to get it?" "Nope, that's okay." You two can move on now. Another experience of the exhilaration of exhaustion. Back in 2007, we hardly had any snow. It was kind of like this year. And then in February, we got hammered. 3 feet. Keene State College, we hardly ever close. We closed for this storm. Nance, let's go hiking.
Yeah, absolutely.
What a trooper. So we decided to go to one of the northernmost of the 4,000 footers, a mountain called Womback. 4,006 feet. Now here I am at the trailhead. That little hiker symbol is supposed to be 2 feet above my head. It was a Friday after a Thursday storm. Nobody'd been there. What were we thinking? And we'd just driven almost 4 hours to get to this mountain. So what were we going to do? Well, okay, we decided to go for it. Now, I'm going to show you a film of Nancy breaking trail. Look at how far she gets in the 30 seconds of this clip. Doesn't that look like fun? Don't you want to go out there and do that? So we ended up doing this for 4 hours. We broke out maybe 1.5 miles worth of trail. We did not make it to the summit, but we got our exercise. And then we came down, and we could go to the restaurant down in Jefferson, and we could eat anything we wanted to. Felt so good.
And how do we do it?
Oh, I skipped a line.
Oh.
So, okay, how did we do it? We broke it down into manageable pieces. Okay, so that's my tree. All I have to do is get to that tree. If I get to that tree and I'm done, or you're done, we turn around, no questions asked. So I would go for my tree.
And I'd be behind Pat going, woohoo, yeah, you can do it, come on, girl, come on.
Nancy would get to the tree, and I'd say, you got a tree? Okay, we're going to keep going. She'd start breaking trail. I'd go, yeah, come on, baby, lift those legs, lift those legs, you can do it, you can do it. Ooh, ooh, ooh. 4 hours, mile and a half. But then we walked down on this trail that we just made. It was so beautiful. It was just this incredible snowy fairyland. And the next day on the internet, somebody wrote, whoever broke out the trail on Wombeck, you guys are rock stars. It's about friendship. Nancy and I are still working on trying to get our patch for climbing the 48 4,000 footers in New Hampshire in winter. They have a special patch for those people. So it's March 10th. It's a beautiful day. The temperatures are mild. There's no wind, bright sun. Let's go climb Mount Washington and check it off our list. So up we went. Gorgeous day. You couldn't ask for a better day. We get to the Ammonoosuc trailhead, and this is what we find. It's snowing. It's windy. It looks like this. But we decide to keep going, just in case the wind will blow the clouds away.
I have found that when I'm hiking, it's almost impossible for me to hold in my emotions, which I know sounds crazy, but it's almost like my emotions weigh something. And I got a hard enough time getting myself up to the top of that mountain without carrying any extra baggage with me. And on this day that we were climbing Washington, I was really sad. My daughter, Jess, and her dog, Deja, had moved to Texas the day before and left my husband and I in an empty house for the first time in 24 years. And I was devastated. And I could feel it in me, and I just kept pushing it down. But the harder I worked to get up that mountain, the closer the emotions got to the surface. And about halfway up Washington, I burst into tears. And I said, I miss her. So I kept hiking, but I was moving very slowly because I was so upset.
We did make it up to the Lake of the Clouds hut, which is the AMC hut about 1.5 miles from the summit of Washington. And these are the conditions that we found. So at that point, it was very clear to us that we were not going to be climbing Washington that day. We were standing out of the wind in the lee of the hut talking about what to do. And I said, you know, Mount Monroe is 0.6 of a mile from the hut. Oh, you want to try for that one? And bless her heart, she said, sure. You know, I knew she was upset. So we started off. I was leading. And about 50 feet later, I couldn't see the trail. I couldn't see the next cairn. I turned around and I looked at her. And I realized it was time to turn around. In that moment, I was choosing the friendship over bagging any peak. And turning around was like going from the darkness into the light. And I realized that there was no place that I would rather be than going down this mountain with my friend. It's also about the friendships we've developed with our trail dogs. The one on the right, she lived with me. Her name is Pinta. The one on the left is Nancy's daughter's dog, Deja. Now, Deja climbed 25 of the 4,000 footers with us before she went to Texas. In the meantime, Nancy and I, we finished our 48, and then she calls me up.
See, the story is that my daughter Jess and her dog Deja had moved to Texas. My daughter was going to live with her fiancé, who was stationed in the Army in Texas. But as soon as Jess got down there, her fiancé was sent to Iraq for a year. and Jess didn't want to live all by herself in a place where she knew no one, so she came home with Deja. So all of a sudden, Deja was back in the house. Now, dogs can get their patches for climbing the 48 mountains in New Hampshire over 4,000 feet. And Deja had climbed 25 of them with us. So I called up Pat. I said, hey, Deja's back. Do you think we could go back and climb the 23 mountains again that Deja didn't climb with us? And we got to do it in 9 months because then Deja's going to go back to Texas. So 23 mountains in 9 months. Oh, here's the really bad part, Pat. We'd have to do another Bonds Traverse, that 20-mile thing. Okay, so one Bonds Traverse and 23 mountains in 9 months for Deja. What do you think?
Absolutely. And here she is.
It's about the grace wave, or that's what I call it, the grace wave. It's the grace wave that compelled me to send that email to Pat when I didn't know her. It's the grace wave that's responsible for the fact that Pat and I ran a marathon. I woke up one morning, I was like, oh my gosh, we're supposed to run a marathon. I called Pat, I said, hey, we're supposed to run a marathon.
I said, no, we're not.
Yes, we are.
I don't think so.
So we took an entire winter off from hiking, and we downloaded a program to train for a marathon, and we trained all winter, and we ran in the Burlington, Vermont marathon a couple springs ago and finished within the time limit.
One and done.
It's the grace wave that's responsible for my book. You know, on our very first hike, we were hiking down a mountain called Passaconaway, and Pat said to me,
I'm going to write a hike report.
a what?
A hike report.
What are you going to say? We went up, we came down.
No. I'm going to talk about what I see, how I feel, what happens. And you're such a good writer. Come on.
You know, I don't know what it was about that invitation that scared me. You know, sometimes people ask you to do things and you're afraid you're going to disappoint them. I was afraid, so I said no. And so Pat wrote the first hike report, and she continued to write them. But every single hike that we went on, when we were coming down, she'd say, Nancy, are you ready to write a hike report? And that was a gift. You know, she held the space open for me until I was ready to step in. And finally I said yes. And the first hike report that I wrote was a very surface report about how it took me 5 power bars to get to the top of Musalaki. But as I wrote more hike reports, I realized that something really big was happening for me in those mountains. I realized that I was overcoming my fears. I realized that I was experiencing true joy. I realized that I was healing childhood wounds. And I started to write about that. We would post our hike reports on our website, and people started to write to me. And they said, Nancy, write a book, put it in a book. And at first I paid no attention. I passed it off, but they just kept saying it. So finally I listened. I put my hike reports together in the form of a manuscript. I sent it out, and within a matter of weeks found a publisher who was willing to publish the book, as well as 245 color pictures in the book. And we are now on our second printing. This presentation is also thanks to the Grace Wave. You know, we were writing these hike reports and taking all these pictures. We had great pictures. And one day on the trail, I said to Pat, hey, we ought to put this together in a presentation. Maybe somebody would be interested.
I don't do those kinds of things.
We both thought it was a great idea.
No, we didn't.
Yes, we did.
No, we didn't.
So, you know, I thought it was a good idea. Anyway, we never did it because we were always hiking. And then one day, within a 24-hour period, we both got injured. Pat hurt her Achilles tendon, and I pulled a calf muscle, and we were out of commission for 6 weeks. So sometimes the grace wave comes into our lives in ways that we don't expect it. We took those 6 weeks and we put together this presentation, and this is our 233rd presentation and our last. You know, I thought at the beginning that the presentation was a chance for us to tell you about our journey. But that's not it. This is the journey. We get as much out of sharing our stories with you as we do reaching the summits of those mountains, thanks to the Grace Wave. It's about loving yourself. It's the last day of December. Pat and I are hiking down a mountain called North Kinsman, and it was Pat's birthday. So I said to Pat, as we were hiking down the mountain, and I didn't plan this, I didn't think about it ahead of time, I just said it. I said, Pat, how about if you tell me all the ways that you love yourself as a way to celebrate your birthday?
Excuse me? What a Nancy thing to ask me. But it was a challenge I couldn't walk away from. There was a long silence. Finally, I said, I love that I'm loyal. Another long silence. I love that I love adventure. I love that I can laugh. Why don't you join in? I'd really like to hear some of yours.
When Pat said that to me on the trail, I realized what a difficult thing I had asked her to do, right? I mean, it's one thing for us to share the things that we don't like about ourselves, right? That would be easy. But to share the things that we love about ourselves, that's tough. So there was a long, long silence. All you could hear was our snowshoes going down the trail. Finally, I said, I love that I find meaning in everything. More silence. And finally, I said, I love the mother in me.
Silence. All you could hear was the sound of our snowshoes scratching down the trail. I love my kindness and my gentleness.
I love that I see the glass half full. You know, I had never heard my own voice say these things about me. But as I heard myself say them, I knew that on a very deep level that they were true.
I love that in spite of the depression that I suffered for most of my life, I never, ever, ever gave up.
I love that I lived through a difficult childhood because that has made me who I am today. I realize that we have created sacred space on Mount Kinsman. As we were hiking down the mountain, we passed a heart that was drawn in the snow. And I realized that that heart was saying, there is love everywhere. Pat and I found a love for ourselves so deep on Mount Kinsman that we'll never forget the experience. It's about having so much fun you feel like a child again. As you've heard, Pat and I made the commitment to climb the 48 mountains in New Hampshire over 4,000 feet in winter. I personally think we're crazy. So when we first made that commitment, before we have done any winter hiking, so before we'd done any of these hikes that you've seen, we decided that we better do a practice hike, our first practice hike in the winter. So we decided to hike Sandwich Dome, which is not a 4,000 footer. It's 3,980 feet. But I was thinking, since there's not a 4 in the front, that it's going to be easy. That was my plan. And on the day that we did this, it was freezing. And, you know, we didn't really know what we were doing winter hiking. We kind of learned the hard way. So on our very first winter hike, within a half an hour, 45 minutes, my water froze because I didn't know how to make it not freeze. When I took a bite of my ham sandwich, my ham cracked. And let's face it, going to the bathroom for us girls out here in this freezing cold is no fun at all, right? Right? So within the first hour of this hike, I was very clear that winter hiking was a very, very, very bad idea, and I was not going to do it. It's like, time out, I'm done. This is it. So I make my decision. I'm not doing this anymore. Now I got to tell Pat. And Pat's ahead of me on the trail, and she looks like she's having fun.
Look at this. Look at this beauty. How many people actually can go up there and see it up close? I was beside myself. I have never seen anything so beautiful. I felt like I was in love.
Okay, how am I going to tell her? So I don't tell her. So we get up to the top of the mountain, we bag the peak, and I know, I got to tell her now. But Pat is hopping and skipping all over the summit, and I just can't do it. So I don't tell her. So we head down the mountain. And now it's eating at me, because I know I'm never going to do this again, and Pat thinks we are. And you know, we head down the mountain, and we get to this really steep section, and Pat sat down on the trail and started to slide down the mountain. So I sat down, I started to slide down the mountain, and I turned from a grumpy, nasty, 55-year-old woman to a joyful, gleeful, hooping and hollering child. And we have a movie. This was such a big learning for me. You know, it reminded me that, yes, hiking's hard. Winter hiking is really hard. Life is hard. But it can also be filled with irrepressible joy.
And it's about sharing that joy. Have any of you spent any time in Acadia National Park? Very special spot. Hopefully you went to the Jordan Pond House and had their popovers. We had 3 each. So Nancy and I went to Acadia, and we were going to spend a weekend hiking. I'm looking at the guide trying to find an interesting or challenging trail. And there's one called the Precipice. That sounds like an interesting trail. And I had in parentheses that the trail is often closed because there were falcons and wildlife nesting on the trail. I said, can we just try? Okay, so we went to the trailhead, and it was open. But they also had a sign, an even bigger one than the other one. Caution, the precipice is maintained as a non-technical climbing route, not a hiking trail. And down below, persons have received serious injuries, and others have died on this mountainside. Look at my face. I love boulder scrambling. I mean, this was a trail that had been built where they embedded iron rods into the rock so you could pull yourself up. So it started out, it wasn't too bad, and it got steeper and steeper and steeper and steeper, and here is Nancy toward the top. She was ready to get off this pitch. So I could hear people talking, and as we got up, we stood up, and they applauded us. It was like, us? And I could hear some people coming up behind us, so we joined them. And as the other people came up off the top of the cliff there, We applauded them. What a learning for me. How much fun it is to cheer and to be cheered.
And that lesson was repeated for us on a mountain called Isolation. So I know lots of you have climbed Isolation because I saw lots of people raise their hands for the 48. Isolation, like the name suggests, is a mountain out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. It's a 15-mile hike, and pretty much nobody hikes Isolation unless they're climbing those 48 4,000 footers and they want to check it off their list, right? So we were hiking Isolation, and we were in the parking lot. We're getting all our stuff together, and there was other people in the lot. And this man came over to me. He was an elderly gentleman, and he said, "I'm going to get my 48 today," which meant that he was going to finish climbing the 48 4,000 footers and be eligible for his patch. He told us that he had climbed all the other mountains 20 years before, and he had never gotten to Isolation. So this was a big day for him. He started off ahead of us. We started up the mountain, and we were almost to the summit when we saw this same older gentleman coming down from the summit. And the second we saw him, we stood to the side of the trail and woo! He burst into tears. The cool thing is, so did we. And that was a huge learning for me. If I had been in the parking lot about to get my 48, I would not have told anyone. I wouldn't have. I would have been embarrassed. I would have figured, they don't know me, they don't care, right? Think about your lives. How often do you tell somebody before you do something awesome? But by this gentleman telling us, we got the joy, right? We got the joy. So I'm a fast learner, sometimes. And so when Pat and I did climb our 48th, which happened to be Jefferson, I told absolutely everybody. And there were a lot of people climbing Jefferson that day. Some people knew what I meant when I said the 48. Some people didn't. It didn't matter. They all clapped. They all cheered. They had as much fun cheering for us as we had being cheered for. And then when Pat and I climbed our 67th, getting our patch for the 67 4,000 footers in New England, we actually put signs on the back of our packs.
And we saw a total of 3 hikers. But they were 3 very enthusiastic hikers.
So one very last story, and that's about sharing the joy. Pat and I decided that we wanted to do some hiking in the Grand Canyon. And we'd never hiked in the Grand Canyon before. We had no idea what we were getting into. So we decided to sign up with a group called the World Outdoors, and we did a rim to rim, hiking from one rim down to the bottom of the canyon and then back up the other side. And you know when you hike with a group of people or you do a project with a group of people, you get really close to them, you know their names, you know about their family, you have jokes that you share. We became very close with this group. They were just great. So in this picture, Pat and I were with a young couple named Jen and Chris. They were in their 30s. And the 4 of us became known as the A-team because we got everywhere first. Who knew that 2 55-year-old women could get anywhere first? So we're about 4 or 5 miles from the South Rim in this picture. And we got up to the South Rim, completing our rim to rim. And we hugged and cheered and celebrated. It was great. And then our guide, who was with us, we were the first group through. You know, the groups got all spread out because everybody hiked at different speeds. So we were the first group through. And our guide said to us, "Come with me. I'll get you a cold drink at the El Tovar Hotel," which is right there on the South Rim. Cold drink sounded really good. It was 120 degrees at the bottom of the canyon the day before when we arrived, so it was hot and dusty. And we had very little water left, and the water we had left was hot, right? So cold drink sounded good. But we knew from our experiences hiking in the White Mountains that there was only one place we needed to be, and that was on that rim, cheering the rest of our group to the rim. So we stayed on the South Rim for hours. And approaching the South Rim, it's switchbacks. So you can look down and you can see the people that are coming up. So we'd look down and we'd identify that they were a member of our group, and we'd start screaming their names. And even after all those miles, they'd start hopping and skipping, and they'd run up the rim, And we formed this long line, giving everybody a high five as they reached the rim. It was so much fun. On this trip, there was a couple named Tom and Mary. And you know how sometimes you meet people and you like them right away? That's how we felt about Tom and Mary. They were just the most beautiful couple. And they had a tough time in the canyon. Mary has really bad knees. So it's a 14-mile hike down into the canyon, and she arrived hours after everybody else, and she was in tears. And she just told us, she said, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get myself to the South Rim. So we were all worried about her. So fast forward to when we were cheering people to the rim. When we looked down those switchbacks and we saw Tom and Mary coming, everybody went crazy. And this is Mary reaching the rim. And Tom. Tom was just streaming tears. You know, it was an honor to be there and to cheer them to the rim. An honor. So after this experience, Pat and I decided that we wanted to do the real epic hike, which is a rim to rim to rim. We start and end at exactly the same place, no car involved. It's 48 miles, and Pat and I decided that we were going to do it by ourselves because we thought we'd learn what we needed to learn from the group. But we stayed in touch with everybody who was on our first rim to rim trip. You know, after a trip, they give you the email addresses of everybody. So we emailed everybody. We said, hey, you guys, we're doing a rim to rim to rim. Here's the dates. Here's the times. Here's what it's going to look like. Come with us. And they all emailed us back at various times, but basically they all said exactly the same thing. We'll be with you in spirit. So here's Pat and I, and we're again about 4 or 5 miles from the South Rim, about to complete our rim to rim to rim. And we got up to the place where there was the switchbacks. And all of a sudden, Pat said to me, Nancy, did you hear that? Pat! Nancy! Somebody was screaming our names. We looked up at the rim and you could see these two tiny figures waving like crazy. It was Tom and Mary, who drove all the way from Illinois, camped out on the rim with their binoculars, waiting to return the gift and cheer us to the rim. In that amazing moment, seeing Tom and Mary, we felt incredibly blessed. Blessed by their love, blessed by our friendship, and blessed by this journey that has taken us to so many summits.
These are the days of your opening. These are the days of your opening. Farther and wilder and deeper and wider and over and over and over and over. 'Cause these are the days of your opening. These are the days of your opening. Farther and wilder and deeper and wider, past all of the aching parts deep down inside you, and widen who you are. can fly, fly, fly. And you can fly.
Thank you very much.